Not even the threat of a Biden-Harris ticket and the amount of taxes and Wall Street regulations the two of them could dream up will dissuade this market. The market nearing record territory as the world digests the news of Kamala Harris as Joe Biden's pick. Investors don't entirely know what to think of her, but I've been doing some digging. Hello, everyone. I am Trish Regan. Welcome to Trish Intel. This is the show where we look at politics and we look at policy through an economic market lens so that you can make money. And gosh, there's a lot of money being made right now. And here's why. I'll tell you stimulus, stimulus, and more stimulus. In just a moment, I'm going to take a look at how Donald Trump is actually beating the Democrats at their own game through these stimulus checks, through a payroll tax cut, through talk of a capital gains cut. But first, let's get to the news of the moment right now, and that's the naming of Kamala Harris to the Democrats' ticket. The good news for investors is she's not Elizabeth Warren, right? The bad news is she still likes higher taxes. She likes government-run healthcare programs. She supports a kind of basic income, all while embracing an anti-business agenda that would hurt the American economy. Now, part of the problem I have with her right now is that I haven't seen enough consistency in her economic record, or even in her so-called law and order record, to truly understand who she is and what she really supports. Now, normally that wouldn't matter so much in a VP. I mean, think about it. Usually the VP is just there for fundraising. But this is not an ordinary year, and Joe Biden, well, he's getting up there in age, and he doesn't entirely command the room the way you'd expect the person at the top of the ticket to command it. So all the more reason for Wall Street to really understand who she is and what she stands for. Keep in mind, with Bernie Sanders, she recently introduced a proposal to provide every single U.S. resident. You don't have to be a citizen, just a resident. You don't even have to have a social security number. You don't even have to have ever paid $1 in tax, but she and Bernie Sanders want to give you $2,000 a month. And it's not like they want to do that for just a few months. They're saying they want to do this until at least 3 months after the COVID-19 pandemic subsides. So who decides that it's over? You can be pretty much guaranteed that would be a political thing. So what, we're going to have one more entitlement? We can't afford it. We fundamentally cannot afford it. We can't have these indefinite handouts. You know, frankly, I don't even entirely love the $400 a week handout that's being talked about. I've got more on that coming up because I worry about incentives. I mean, why go to work if you can get the handout? There are long-term unintended consequences associated with freebies, like federal checks. Meanwhile, let's get back to what we know about Kamala's economic thinking. We know she wants basic income. We also know that she's talked a lot about a healthcare proposal that would be a broad Medicare for all type product that allegedly would still allow for some private insurers. It's very costly, trillions and trillions of dollars. It lacks details and it lacks any kind of foundation in reality. And I think this is really too bad, considering that her father was an economist and her mother was a doctor. I mean, she ought to have been able to come up with something more creative, given that background. And then you got her tax policy ideas. She wants to put back a tax cut that benefits the wealthiest Americans in high-tax states, entirely out of touch with this middle-class agenda she allegedly supports. And I struggle with that. I really do, because for goodness sakes, why would you be giving these tax cuts to wealthy, uber wealthy people in states like New York and California, which clearly have no idea how to budget themselves? You know, if you didn't already know, I am not a huge fan of taxes, especially when bloated government programs offer so little in return for our hard-earned dollars. And in the case of these high-tax states, the president's new policies prohibit the deduction of state and local taxes from the federal returns. And yet, this is what Kamala Harris wants? She wants these SALT deductions back for her rich friends? I mean, really? If you're going to campaign for lower taxes for the rich, can we just be honest about it? I mean, give me the trickle-down argument or something like that. Don't pretend it's something entirely different. All that said, I will say credit where credit is due. She has a very impressive record as a prosecutor and as California's Attorney General. She's put a whole lot of criminals behind bars. She seemed to have once stood for law and order in a passionate and important way. However, I don't know how that helps her right now. It's not exactly a selling point for her party. Maybe the thinking is, oh, well, suburban housewives, et cetera, will be okay with her because maybe this defund the police movement is really not gaining as much in popularity as we worry it could. Anyway, I do think it's unclear how her past work will be received by her party. That is still a wild card out there. And then I would just say, on a personal note, I I, I like her demeanor. I kind of was impressed with her at the debate when she went after Joe Biden in such a powerful way, and she really showed her strength there as a lawyer, because you saw her get a little bit soft. She talked about how she was hurt because of the busing rules, et cetera, back in the 1970s. And it was very, very effective. There are other times when I haven't loved her questioning. I mean, think about how she questioned Kavanaugh, and it was, for my taste anyway, too aggressive and too pointed and too political. So what's going to be interesting here is how Americans react to her. Some might actually find her personality somewhat polarizing, and so they'll want an opportunity to see a little bit more. And I don't know if 3 months, because you figure we've got from now to November, I don't know if 3 months is really enough for America to get to know her, to appreciate her, to understand her. So in considering that, I do think the Democrats are taking a chance. She's a very strong personality there as VP. And I don't think she's the kind of person that's going to play second fiddle to a man who, well, doesn't always seem to know quite what day it is. I mean, she's the lead there, clearly the lead. And perhaps that's their intention. Perhaps they realize their mistake in nominating a man who seems, verbally anyway, quite lost on many occasions. So maybe this was the thinking. She can effectively speak for him. Anyway, you know what? Fundamentally, all the personality in the world will not translate into jobs. A good economy is the result of good policy. And as such, most Americans are not quite ready to trade prosperity and capitalism for high taxes, slow growth, and economic instability. The months ahead will be historic and critical in our path forward. Coming up, how President Trump outsmarted the Dems at their own game and why it means the market's gonna keep going higher and higher for the foreseeable future, despite George Soros and Warren Buffett's warnings. The market loves this. Plus, why the defund the police movement will result in a two-tiered America. Minneapolis City Council voting to dismantle the police, yet demanding $4,500 a day for private security detail? For those bureaucrats, America's biggest cities, they are under threat, and bondholders right now need to listen up. I've got all the intel. Politically, it's brilliant. President Trump just beat the Dems at their own game. He's enacting an executive order to ensure that jobless Americans would receive $400 a week, $300 from the federal government, $100 from states, and Democrats are positively furious. They're furious. They're saying he doesn't have the constitutional power to do this. You know, guys, talking about making yourself look bad in a political year. Chuck Schumer, the new Ebenezer Scrooge? Welcome back to Trish Intel. This is a show where we look at politics and we look at policies through an economic and market lens. The market's on a tear. S&P in near record territory. Investors have been really moving out of treasuries, U.S. treasuries in recent days, yields inching higher. And you know what? That's good news, because it signals that investors are a little less worried about the U.S. economy. And so that's a positive sign. Now, in the interest of news you can use to make some money here, remember what I told you last week? Remember what I said would happen? I said the market should be betting on stimulus out of Washington, D.C. You know, so many people are wringing their hands saying, I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm like, wait a second, guys. These are politicians. Yes, you know it's going to happen. And it is happening. You know, I suspect the president is looking very hard at this indexing of capital gains for inflation, which the market will love. I can pretty much guarantee that will cause more buying. Meanwhile, He's all about the stimulus. Now, regardless of what you think of federal stimulus and all these checks, because, I'm not in love with them. I'm fiscally pretty responsible, and I have serious misgivings, including my concern that they're going to act as a deterrent for getting people back to work. There was a study by University of Chicago, and it showed that 68% of those people surveyed were actually making more money during the pandemic than they did before the crisis, and that was all thanks to those checks, federal plus state. However, nonetheless, I'm trying to look at this through just the lens of reality and the lens of investment. And the reality is, these are politicians after all. Donald Trump wants to get reelected. And the economic success of the country is very much tied to that. So, of course, he wants to see something to tide people over. And you would think that the Democrats would too, right? You would think that because, this is what they've always talked about. They're the ones that want the basic income, for goodness sake. So you'd think that they would welcome in any way, shape, or form stimulus. And instead, they're taking the president's bait. I mean, President Trump can now turn around and say, whoa, Democrats, I thought you wanted to help. And yet apparently you don't. And apparently they don't. Chuck Schumer, he really does look like a kind of Scrooge for opposing this one. Not to mention they've been holding this up on Capitol Hill because they want to give a giant tax credit back to their billionaire donors to help support these fiscally irresponsible states like New York and California. This is classic. Democrats pretending to care for the working class while campaigning for tax deductions for the uber rich and holding up aid to the people who need it. I'll tell you, the left is on the losing end of this argument. They're trying to make this about constitutional power at a time when people are hurting. These folks actually don't seem to want the U.S. to succeed economically right now. They don't. And they seem to want this economic failure because they think it's going to help them come November. Nancy Pelosi, meanwhile, telling MSNBC this week that the president, he only cares about the stock market. He doesn't care about people. Well, first of all, I think if he's putting these stimulus checks into being, then yes, he does care about the people. And I think he cares about the people in part because it is very much tied to his name and his legacy. But as for the stock market, shouldn't he care? I mean, why shouldn't the president care that the stock market's doing well? I mean, that's kind of important, right? If you guys there, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, actually did your job, I have a feeling you guys would agree with the president on stimulus, and you could actually help the stock market too. What Donald Trump has done is he has exposed the pure politics of this. The same old crowd that says, we want to help people. We want to give basic income and put the country on a path towards socialism. They can't find it in their heart to do the right thing when it comes to giving people just, a few bucks. Stimulus is going to happen. It is. The market knows this, and that's the reality. So when you think of stimulus, both fiscal and monetary, because don't forget the Fed in all this, they're very active as well, plus the potential for a capital gains cut. That, my friends, should result in a higher market environment in the near term. So think about that as you put your money to work. Coming up, violence in the streets of Chicago. The looting is rampant and local law enforcement seem powerless to stop it. A protest leader there insisting businesses can pay for this. They have the insurance. Oh boy. This is why we have government, folks, to protect individuals from mobs like this. Coming up, why it is time to consider bringing in National Guard. Plus, a little later, I have some choice words for Joe Biden in his attempt to prop up women with his VP pick. He's actually going about it all wrong. Violence and chaos in the streets of Chicago. 100 people arrested this week as looters stormed the city's magnificent mile early Monday, smashing windows, stealing merchandise, challenging police, and even at one point exchanging gunfire with officers. And now one of the organizers says, it's no big deal. It's no big deal because businesses have insurance. Oh, You know what? This violence, this disregard for property, this disregard for people and their lives on the streets of the greatest economy in the world, it's unacceptable. Welcome back, everyone, to Trish Intel. This is the show where we examine policies and politics through an economic and market lens so you can make some money. I'm Trish Regan. You know, what is happening in Chicago right now, a city I love and have spent a lot of time in, is pretty awful. The violence erupted, city officials say, because of a false report on social media on Sunday afternoon that followed an officer-involved shooting in the area. And so there was some misinterpretation of what happened, but we're told officers shot and wounded a 20-year-old man Sunday after he fired shots at them while being chased. That's according to authorities. Now, I understand the outrage. I really do at the police. I get it. You know, that's a whole other challenge. However, the answer, it's never to loot. The answer is never to destroy property. The answer is never to defund the police. The economic implications of that are just too massive. I mean, why should a business want to open a shop on Magnificent Mile, which is like the Fifth Avenue in New York City, if the property itself cannot be protected? You know, hey, why would an individual want to live in Chicago if his or her life could be at risk thanks to these chaotic mobs? It seems to me that government should be there and should be able to protect the people. And if Chicago's having a problem, you know what? You don't need to have that much pride. You should be able to go to the president and ask him to be able to send in reinforcements. This should not be political. This is about protecting people, protecting their lives, protecting their livelihoods, protecting our economy. Defunding the police makes no sense. Not allowing police to really do their jobs effectively makes no sense, because we run the risk, if we keep this up, that we're going to look like a two-tiered America. Really, the Minneapolis example is a great one. The city council in Minneapolis voted not to just defund the police, but to dismantle the police. We'll see whether or not they're successful. But this is what they want to do. I guess they'll just send in social workers to handle things. Good luck with that. But here's the irony of it. The same group on the city council that voted to dismantle the police, they're actually demanding private security, and they're getting it to the tune of $4,500 a day, all bought and paid for by the taxpayers of Minneapolis. So think about that. The taxpayers are on the hook for these bureaucrats' private security team, all while they, the taxpayers themselves, get no police protection? How's that fair? It's not. It's not. You know, and these protesters in Chicago and Portland and Minneapolis, all throughout the country, you got to wonder, what do they really want? Because if we go down this path, American cities will not be safe. Right now, they're a disaster. Everybody's moving away. And you know what? When they move away, there goes the tax base. You know, granted, the handwriting was on the wall all along. Higher taxes had already made so many of America's urban communities less desirable. You throw in a pandemic, an economic shutdown, the defunding of police, and escalating crime rates, and suddenly you have the perfect storm hitting America's cities. It's destroying them, and it's unclear if they're ever going to recover anytime soon or in the near future. There is a mass exodus unlike anything we've seen in recent times. I mean, think about New York City, right? An estimated nearly 500,000 people have up and left. Well, what does that do to the tax base? What does that do to the spending base? The loss of revenue for the city will prove staggering. The governor of New York gets it. He gets the severity of the problem. Governor Andrew Cuomo is personally offering to take anyone, any billionaire who considers moving back to New York, out for a drink. A nice gesture. But so far, his dance card appears rather empty, because you see, a lot of people say they're for higher taxes when they go out there and support liberal candidates that are proposing these taxes on individuals and on businesses. But when it comes to their own wallets, talk is cheap. Indeed, in their coronavirus stimulus package, Democrat lawmakers push for the reinstitution of that SALT deduction, a benefit designed to help the uber wealthy supporters of theirs and better position blue states at the expense of fiscally irresponsible, responsible states. responsible states that don't have state and local income taxes. I mean, it's not fair. How's that fair? Somehow Texas needs to pay for the problems of California? I think not. It's California's problem if they're just going to be wildly irresponsible. Proposals from Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, they're not going to cut it. She wants a billionaire's tax, an ultra-millionaire's tax, anything she can think of, but here's what she doesn't get. Those people can and will leave. They will not be there in the state of New York to tax. And so all New York and California and the rest of them are left with are massive liabilities. There's a recent report out from a group called Truth in Accounting, and it looks at the financial state of the cities. And bottom line, do you know that only 12 of 75 largest cities, the largest cities in the U.S., actually have a surplus? You got 63 states in this report that do not have the money to pay their bills. And you know what? This was all data accumulated before the pandemic. I mean, we can't afford to continue going down this path. Bondholders should be watching it. And my advice to lawmakers in American cities is to get smart, to be responsible, to keep your people safe, because our economy matters. Coming up, Joe Biden talks a good game about having a woman for his VP, but in doing so, isn't he kind of taking something away from women? And Kamala Harris herself? I'm setting the record straight with more Trish Intel next. China this week sanctioning again. China's after some U.S. lawmakers, including Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. They really don't like those guys, do they? Rubio especially, I've noticed. But you know what? Cruz and Rubio should consider it a badge of honor, really, because China's just out there looking out for China. We know that. We need to be looking out for the U.S. Speaking of which, there's a report out today that China is working even harder to grow its domestic economy at the expense of everyone else. No kidding. Of course it is. I mean, China's been upset with us and others for a whole bunch of reasons. You could go back hundreds of years on this one, but let's just talk about the here and now, and they're upset about Hong Kong. You see, China wants Hong Kong to not be free. Now, we have business interests there, and so we need it to be free. So we've sanctioned them, they've sanctioned us, and so it goes tit for tat effectively with China. But the reality of all this is, it should be making it crystal clear to us that we need to understand what China's goals are. And those goals, how they would affect the United States. China wants to dominate the world as the main player on the world stage. Xi Jinping has said as much. Think about his 2017 address to his own party, the CCP has very grand plans. Now, ultimately, I suspect they will want to replace the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And as such, they will be positioning themselves to be the hegemonic power of the world. We can't allow it. We can't. I mean, we need to be strategic about this. I'm not saying that's happening tomorrow. It's not even happening 10 years from now, but it could certainly happen in our lifetime. And so we need to think about how to improve our ability to negotiate with them. And we have the power right now. We have the economic power. So we need to use it while we still can. I mean, the reality is, if we don't do it now, then we're going to wake up someday and we're going to be, I don't know, France at best, Venezuela at worst, and China's going to be the new United States of America. I think about everything that we're dependent on China for. And, I'm rationing Lysol wipes in my house now and Clorox wipes and saying, kids, don't use those needlessly. I used to have a ton of these things. You see, Amazon was on automatic delivery and I would just keep getting the Clorox wipes. It was kind of a mistake. And so consequently, I had far too many Clorox wipes than one could have ever used in this lifetime. But then again, there was the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, well, we're going through them. And do you know that you still can't get Lysol or Clorox wipes on Amazon? You can't get them in stores, not where I live. And the reason is because all those chemicals are made in China. And there's a backlog. And you can't get it here. I mean, think about this is just Lysol and Clorox, for goodness sakes. You've got drugs that are vital. You've got technology that is vital, and we are entirely dependent on them for these things. We need to think about that. We need to distance ourselves even more right now from this country that does not play by the rules. We can use our economic sanctions. Let's use them while we can, because we don't want to wind up in a situation that's much, much worse. Coming up, why Joe Biden is sort of anything but a feminist. You know, this whole woman as VP is nothing but a direct play on identity politics. I'm setting the record straight with more Trish intel next. So I appreciate where Joe Biden was trying to go. He's trying to do the right thing by women. And you know what? I'm very happy that a woman who is a minority is now on the Democratic ticket. That is a good thing for women. But you know what's not a good thing? What's not a good thing is how they went about this. It actually lets women down. And in some ways, it lets Kamala Harris down. I'm Trish Regan. It's great to have you listening here to Trish Intel. I do hope you subscribe to the podcast. You can get all the intel on what's moving markets. And you know I couldn't end the show with at least setting the record straight on this whole business about nominating a woman and how great that is. You know, it is great. It is great, but it sure could be better. It could be better because wouldn't it have been more meaningful and more powerful if Joe Biden had just said, I want to pick the best person for the job? If the Democrat Party said, we're behind the best person for the job, and you know what? If that person happens to be a woman, maybe even a minority woman, then great, good for her. The best person should be the one that gets the job. But for Biden to so explicitly say he was only in the market for half the population, you know, it effectively robs women, and it robs Kamala Harris of that moment. True feminists should welcome the opportunity for women to be recognized as simply the best candidate. No special considerations. You know, none of that. Because we, as a country, were founded on this idea of meritocracy. And that's important. You know, but it's politics, I get it. And they're doing whatever they can to help basically garner this support among women and among minorities. And so you play to that. That's what they're doing. But I do think that she has enough in the way of credentials to be able to stand on her own 2 feet. Look, women are not tokens, okay? We're not here so that Joe Biden or the Democrat Party can say he or they picked a woman as though we would not otherwise be deserving. We are. And no one should take that away from us. You know, I like to think that people listen to this commentary because it's insightful and it's intelligent. And yes, I am a woman, and that affects a lot of my viewpoints. And that's important. It provides, I think, the listeners with a kind of diversity that's very essential. But nonetheless, if you're listening because you like the content. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with any special consideration. I don't want your special consideration. I don't think women or minorities or anybody deserves or needs those special considerations, because you know what? We've come a long ways. And yes, there's a long ways to go. And discrimination for sure still exists in society. And it's horrible and it's awful. And we need to rid ourselves of that. But the answer is not to say, okay, well, we're going to make special considerations for this group or that group. The answer is to enable everyone to have the tools so that they can compete. And this means giving our kids the best education possible. It doesn't mean shutting down schools in Chicago and DC, by the way. I'll save that for another day. But it means giving Americans the tools that they need to be able to achieve the American dream on their own. Our resumes, our ideas, our leadership characteristics as women, for example, that's what should be most valued.